We are in a study that is looking at the Gospel of Matthew. We are at chapter 10, and we will be reading verses 1 to 4. I will be reading from the Jerusalem Bible. He summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits, with power to cast them out and to cure all kinds of diseases and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, the one who was to betray him. We are now at a new stage in the ministry of Jesus. I suspect that Jesus from the very beginning had his eyes on the future and the need to raise up leaders to take over from him. Jesus, in that sense, was a pragmatist. I will not say it is pervasive, but you can look at any generation of the church and you can find gifted, godly leaders who did not prepare for the future. People who have something about them that allows great churches to be built or great ministries to be built. Then one day, because of death, age, or the need for fresh leadership, that person has to leave the center of that church or that ministry to someone else. What can happen is that that church or ministry begin to go into a period of decline, and the effectiveness of that ministry or church is lost. The church or ministry was built around that individual, and that individual defined the church or the ministry. Now, we understand that to a degree, there are certain people that are irreplaceable, but that's not what we're talking about here. We are talking about the inability of a leader of a church or ministry to, as it were, prepare for the day in which he or she has to step aside. And that person can fail to prepare the church or ministry for a change of leadership and or fail to groom the person that needs to take over the position of leadership. In churches or ministries, the focus can be so much on the present and the need to do certain things that the future is forgotten with peril. You see, ministry is also always about nurturing the future leaders. In fact, you can have a far more pronounced and effective ministry in a way if you properly prepare for the future than just focused on the present. Now, we are not sure at what time Jesus began to set aside 12 of his disciples to be apostles. And remember, it is actually in Luke's gospel that indicates that out of the disciples, 12 apostles were chosen. What we can say is that Jesus did not begin his ministry by appointing 12 leaders. It seems that Jesus did garner a following, and from that larger group, he winnowed out, he sifted through, and he selected 12 individuals to be apostles. In other words, Jesus picked from people who were beginning to get a sense of what they would be getting into. They would be aware that the religious leaders were not always happy with Jesus. They would be getting a sense of what people thought of Jesus. They were getting a sense of how great the need was out there. They were probably also starting to get a sense that not all the people were sincere when they sought out Jesus. Jesus was slowly, surely, steadily drawing these people into the work of his ministry. The number of apostles would seem to reflect that there were 12 tribes in ancient Israel. So we could see a passage like Genesis chapter 35 and verses 22 to 26, or look at Numbers chapter 1. I'm not sure that Jesus actually fought long and hard as to the actual number of apostles he must have, but I think we can see that 12 in some ways represents a good choice. If you had too many, it'd be too hard to train them. If you had too small of a group, well, that's too thin of a base to build a future ministry on. It probably meant that there were competing personalities within this group, and we could also probably say competing values within this group. It was large enough so all could get to know each other well, yet such that there were smaller groups within the group. So, I mean, it wasn't that large. You didn't know each other. 12 people meant that Jesus was creating a solid foundation to build his work on. Now, it's kind of fascinating if you've ever done an in-depth study on the apostles, especially after the resurrection of Jesus. You will find all sorts of post-biblical legends on what they did. And I would say that probably basically none of them are worth anything because most of them come relatively later, i.e., a couple of generations after the close of the book of Acts, the New Testament. The fact is that most of the apostles seem to disappear from our view after the Gospels. Now, there are some exceptions. Let's begin with Peter. Peter's story, well, it's told in the first half of the book of Acts. So we have some details about what Peter did after the resurrection. We also know that Peter wrote the letters 1st and 2nd Peter. John the Apostle is also mentioned in the book of Acts, but he largely disappears from that book after an early reference. John, though, stays within our sites because John wrote a number of books that get included in the canon of the New Testament. Think here of the Gospel of John, the short letters of 1st John, 2nd John, 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. Now, also in the book of Acts, we have the story of the death of James, the brother of John. That is found in chapter 12. And remember not to confuse James, the brother of John, with James, the brother of Jesus. This latter James is the one who wrote the book of James. Matthew, well, we have his gospel. So what does that give us? About maybe 4 apostles out of 12 that we have some sort of post-resurrection account of what they were doing. The rest largely disappear from view. The point I would make here is that I can basically summarize what we actually know of the apostles of Jesus after his death in one paragraph, because there is so little actual known material as to what they did. It seems that one could say, and this is an argument from silence, which is not always the best way to advance our knowledge, that the apostles learned only too well the idea of raising up the next generation of leaders. You see, we know very little of what the apostles actually did, and yet we know that the early church flourished. The legends of the apostles tried to explain the reality by claiming that these apostles did all sorts of wonderful things. It may be that the church growth that we see was not that they did these things, but that Jesus raised up a new generation of leaders who in turn learned from him how to raise up another generation of leaders who did those wonderful things to take the work of the church forward. You see, the future of the church is always going to rest on our ability to train the next generation of leaders, men and women who will in faith be obedient to the call to lay aside worldly ambitions and dreams to make the gospel alive to the world that they are in.